The pen was heavier than it should have been. I held it above the signature line, and across the mahogany table, my brother Derek stared at me with the kind of stillness that comes just before something breaks. His lawyer sat rigid beside him, a folder of documents arranged in neat stacks between us. The conference room smelled of furniture polish and the faint, synthetic lemon of the water pitchers no one had touched. Through the window behind Derek, the city spread out in grids of glass and steel, indifferent to what was happening on the 32nd floor. I signed my name. The scratch of ink on paper was the only sound. Derek's face did not change immediately. He watched my hand complete the signature, watched me set the pen down, watched me slide the document across to his lawyer. Then something shifted in his jaw, a small spasm that traveled up to his eyes. He knew what this meant. His company, the one he had built with other people's money and his own outsized confidence, now belonged to me. Not to a consortium of investors, not to a private equity firm that would strip it and flip it. To his older brother, the one he had spent 30 years calling cautious, boring, small. I folded my hands and waited for him to speak. He did not. His lawyer cleared her throat and began collecting the documents. The meeting was over. That was 3 months ago. I have thought often about how we arrived at that table. Not the legal mechanics or the financial collapse. Those are easy enough to trace. But the years before. The choices that separated us. The moments when a different word or gesture might have changed the arc of what followed. I do not think about these things with regret. Regret implies a desire to undo, and I would not undo what I have become. But I do think about them with a kind of archaeological patience, the way you might brush dirt from something buried to see its shape more clearly. Derek and I grew up in the same house, ate at the same table, learned to ride bikes on the same stretch of cracked sidewalk. Our father worked in telecommunications, a steady job with benefits and a pension he collected for 11 years before his heart gave out. Our mother kept the household accounts in a spiral notebook and never bought anything she could not pay for that month. They were not joyless people, but they understood the cost of things, and they understood that wanting something was not the same as needing it. I absorbed this. Derek did not. By the time we were in high school, the difference was visible. I worked weekends at a hardware store, saved most of what I earned, bought a used car with cash when I turned 17. Derek worked when he had to, spent what he made and more, borrowed against future allowances, talked his way out of consequences. He had a gift for persuasion, for making people feel that his enthusiasm was a form of generosity. He would walk into a room, and people would turn toward him. I would walk into the same room, and people would nod politely and return to their conversations. I did not resent this. I simply noted it. After college, I took a job in operations management at a mid-sized logistics firm. The work was repetitive in the way that competence is repetitive. You identify inefficiencies, you correct them, you document the correction, you move to the next problem. I was promoted 3 times in 8 years. I married a woman named Lauren, who taught 6th grade, and shared my belief that life was better when you could see the foundation you were standing on. We bought a small house with a mortgage we could afford, even if one of us lost our job. We had 2 daughters. We saved for their education from the month they were born. Derek, meanwhile, went into sales, then consulting. Then he started his first company, a platform for something I never entirely understood, but which involved connecting businesses to consumers in a way that somehow justified venture capital. He raised $2 million before the company had revenue. I remember him telling me this at a family dinner, his voice loud and bright, and I remember him looking at me when he said it, waiting for a reaction. I said it sounded promising. He laughed and said I had no idea what promising meant. The company folded within 3 years. Derek walked away with nothing but immediately started another one. This one was in health tech, an app that tracked biometrics and sold the data to insurance companies, or maybe it was the other way around. He raised $4 million that time. He bought a condo downtown, a car that cost more than I made in a year, and started wearing suits that looked like they had been assembled by a team. At Thanksgiving, he arrived late, apologized briefly, and spent 20 minutes on his phone while the rest of us ate. When he finally sat down, he talked about scaling and market capture and exits. My daughters, who were 6 and 8 at the time, watched him with the polite confusion children show when adults behave strangely. My mother asked him if he was eating enough. He laughed at that too. The health tech company lasted longer, almost 5 years, but it also ended badly. Something about regulatory scrutiny and investor lawsuits. Derek never explained the details, and I did not ask. By then I had been made a director at my firm, overseeing 3 regional hubs and a staff of 40. The work was not glamorous, but it was solid. I knew how every part of the operation functioned. I knew the people who worked for me, their strengths and frustrations. I knew what we could promise and what we could deliver. I went home at a reasonable hour most nights. I coached my daughter's soccer teams. I fixed the deck when the boards started to rot. I did not think of my life as small. I thought of it as mine. Derek started his 3rd company when he was 41. By then I had been at my firm for 19 years and had been promoted to vice president of operations. I had also begun investing, carefully, mostly index funds and real estate, the kind of strategy that requires patience and produces no dramatic stories. My portfolio grew at a pace that matched the market. I did not time anything. I did not chase trends. I simply put money where it would compound and did not touch it. Derek's 3rd company was in logistics, which surprised me. It was the first time our professional worlds had overlapped. He called me when he was in the planning stages and asked if I wanted to get coffee. We met at a place near his office, all reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs. He ordered something with oat milk. I had black coffee. He spread his laptop open on the table and showed me mock-ups and projections. His platform, he explained, would use algorithms to optimize supply chains in real time, cutting costs and improving delivery windows. He said the market was worth billions. He said the incumbents were too slow to adapt. He said he had commitments from investors but wanted my perspective because I understood the space. I looked at his slides. They were impressive in the way that salesmanship is impressive, a glossy confidence that does not pause for inconvenient questions. I asked him about operating costs. I asked him about customer acquisition and retention. I asked him how his algorithms accounted for variables that could not be predicted, labor shortages and weather and regulatory shifts. He answered each question with more slides, more projections, more assurances. When I pointed out that his margins were thin and depended on flawless execution at scale, he smiled and said that was the whole point. Scale was where you made money. You had to be willing to lose money to make money. I told him it sounded risky. He leaned back in his chair and said risk was just fear in a suit. I did not invest. He did not ask me to, which told me he had not really wanted my perspective. He had wanted my validation, or perhaps my envy. When I declined to give him either, the coffee ended quickly. He paid with a card that had no credit limit, left a tip that was larger than the bill, and walked out ahead of me without looking back. His company, which he named Velocity Solutions, launched 6 months later. The early press was enthusiastic. Derek hired aggressively, leased office space in a new tower, and gave interviews where he talked about disrupting an industry that had been asleep for decades. I saw his photo in a business journal, arms crossed, staring past the camera with the expression of someone who had already won. The caption called him a visionary. I kept working. I kept saving. When my firm was acquired by a larger corporation, I negotiated a retention package that included equity and a clear path to a C-suite role if I stayed 5 more years. I stayed. At night, after my daughters had gone to bed, I would review my accounts and run projections. By the time I was 50, I calculated, I could retire if I wanted to. I did not particularly want to, but I liked knowing I could. Velocity Solutions grew rapidly. Derek expanded into 3 cities, then 6, then 12. He raised another round of funding, then another. The numbers were staggering: 30 million, then 50, then 80. I did not follow his company closely, but it was impossible to avoid entirely. He posted constantly on social media, photos of team retreats and product launches and panel discussions. He spoke at conferences. He appeared on podcasts. He never called me, but twice a year we saw each other at family gatherings, and each time he made a point of asking how my job was going. He said it in a tone that suggested a job was something quaint, something people did when they lacked imagination. I told him it was going well. He nodded and changed the subject. My mother died the winter I turned 52. It was sudden, a stroke that left her unconscious and took her 3 days later. Derek flew in for the funeral, but left immediately after the service. He said he had a board meeting he could not miss. I stayed for a week, sorting through her things with my father's help, packing up the house where we had grown up. In a drawer in the kitchen, I found her old notebook, the one where she had tracked every expense. The pages were yellowed and the handwriting was small and precise. I sat at the table where she used to sit and read through years of entries: groceries, utilities, school supplies, car repairs. There was no drama in these pages, no sudden windfalls or disasters, just the steady accumulation of a life lived within its means. I kept the notebook. The first signs that something was wrong with Velocity Solutions appeared about a year after my mother's funeral. A trade publication ran a story about missed delivery windows and customer complaints. Derek responded on social media, calling the story a hit piece funded by competitors. Then there was another story, this one about employee turnover and unpaid invoices. Derek did not respond to that one. Then the funding rumors started, whispers that the company was burning through cash faster than it was generating revenue, that the last round of investors were asking difficult questions, that the algorithms which were supposed to optimize everything were not optimizing enough. I did not reach out. Derek would not have welcomed it, and I had nothing to offer except observations he already knew. By the following spring, the whispers had become public. Velocity Solutions was insolvent. The board had ousted Derek as CEO, though he remained the largest shareholder, which meant he would be the one to absorb the most damage when the company collapsed. There were lawsuits from investors who claimed they had been misled. There were lawsuits from vendors who had not been paid. There was a brief investigation by the SEC that ended without charges, but left the company's reputation in ruins. Derek stopped posting online. He stopped appearing at conferences. When I saw him at a cousin's wedding that summer, he looked thinner and older, the kind of aging that happens when stress carves away everything that is not essential. We stood near the bar, holding drinks neither of us wanted. I asked him how he was doing. He said he was fine, in a voice that meant the opposite. Then he said I must be happy, watching him fail. I told him I was not. He finished his drink and walked away. I thought about that conversation for a long time. I thought about what it meant that he believed I would take pleasure in his suffering. I thought about the distance between us, not the physical miles, but the other kind. The kind that accumulates when two people choose different values and then spend decades defending those choices against each other. I thought about what I wanted, not from Derek, but for myself. 6 months after the wedding, I got a call from a business broker I had worked with once before. He specialized in distressed assets, companies that were failing but might be salvageable under the right management. He told me about a logistics firm that was going through bankruptcy proceedings, a company with solid infrastructure and client relationships but catastrophic debt and leadership failures. He thought it might interest me. He sent over a prospectus. I recognized the name immediately. Velocity Solutions. I read through the documents that night. The company was worse than I had imagined. Debt in the tens of millions, assets barely worth half that, contracts that were bleeding money every month. But underneath the wreckage, I could see the shape of something functional. The routing algorithms, despite their flaws, were sophisticated. The client base, though angry, had not left entirely. The warehouse leases were long-term and below market rate. If you stripped away the excess, cut the overhead, rebuilt the leadership structure, and focused on execution instead of expansion, the company could work. It would not make anyone rich overnight, but it would not need to. It could be profitable in 3 years, sustainable in 5. I called the broker back. I told him I was interested but needed to see the full financials and the terms of the bankruptcy sale. He said there were other bidders, mostly private equity firms looking to liquidate. I said I was not looking to liquidate. He asked what I was looking for. I told him I wanted to run it. He was quiet for a moment, then said he would set up a meeting with the trustee. The due diligence took 3 months. I reviewed every contract, every lease, every line of the balance sheet. I interviewed key employees who had survived the layoffs. I visited the warehouses and distribution centers. I hired consultants to assess the technology and the operational workflows. I spent evenings running scenarios, modeling different restructuring plans, calculating how much capital I would need to stabilize the company, and how long it would take to see returns. I did not tell Lauren what I was considering until I was certain it was viable. When I finally sat her down and explained, she asked if I was sure. I said I was. She asked if this was about Derek. I said it was not, which was true, though not in the way she probably understood. It was not about revenge or proving something. It was about seeing an opportunity and having the resources and competence to act on it. Derek's failure had created that opportunity, but the opportunity itself was mine to take or leave. I made an offer. It was lower than the company's nominal value, but higher than what the liquidators were proposing. The trustee reviewed my plan and my financials. I had liquidated part of my portfolio and secured a line of credit. I had letters from former colleagues who vouched for my operational expertise. I had a detailed restructuring proposal that addressed every major liability. The trustee asked why I wanted a company that had failed so spectacularly. I told him I wanted the company that existed underneath the failure. He approved the sale. I did not tell Derek until the paperwork was nearly complete. I called him on a Sunday afternoon. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice flat and wary. I told him I was buying Velocity Solutions out of bankruptcy. There was a long silence. Then he asked if I was joking. I said I was not. He asked why. I told him because I thought I could fix it. He laughed, a sound that had no humor in it, and said I had no idea what I was getting into. I told him I had spent 3 months learning exactly what I was getting into. He asked if I was doing this to humiliate him. I said no. He did not believe me. The call ended badly. The closing meeting was the one I described at the start. The conference room on the 32nd floor, Derek and his lawyer on one side, me and mine on the other. The terms were standard for a distressed sale. Derek would retain a small percentage of equity, enough to give him a nominal stake, but not enough to influence decisions. He would have no operational role. He would be barred from speaking publicly about the company for 2 years. In exchange, some of his personal liability would be restructured. It was the best deal he was going to get, and he knew it. He signed without reading the documents. When it was over, his lawyer tried to shake my hand. I shook it. Derek stood and walked out without a word. The first 6 months were difficult. The employees who remained were shell-shocked and skeptical. Clients were nervous. Vendors demanded upfront payment. I spent the first month just listening, sitting down with people individually and asking what had gone wrong and what they needed to do their jobs properly. I cut half the executive team and promoted 3 people from within who understood the operations. I renegotiated contracts. I sold off 2 underperforming divisions. I moved the headquarters to a smaller office and eliminated the perks that had drained cash without improving productivity. I worked 70-hour weeks and did not complain about it because I had chosen it. By the end of the first year, the company was cash flow positive. By the end of the second year, we had paid down 1/3 of the debt. Clients started renewing contracts. Employees stopped looking for other jobs. The company was not flashy. It did not make headlines. But it worked, in the way that my life had always worked, by attending to details and keeping promises and refusing to confuse motion with progress. Derek never called to ask how things were going. I heard through family that he had taken a consulting job, something vague and probably marginal, the kind of work people do when they are rebuilding their credibility. I did not reach out. There was nothing I wanted to say, and I suspected there was nothing he wanted to hear. 3 years after the acquisition, I was invited to speak at a logistics conference. The organizers wanted me to talk about turning around distressed companies. I accepted. The conference was in a city 2 hours from where Derek now lived, and I wondered if he would hear about it. I wondered if he would come. He did not. I gave the talk in a hotel ballroom to an audience of 200 people. I told them the story of Velocity Solutions, though I did not name it or Derek. I talked about the difference between growth and sustainability. I talked about the dangers of confusing vision with execution. I talked about how discipline, the unglamorous work of showing up and doing the next right thing, was the only reliable foundation for anything that lasted. When I finished, there was polite applause. Afterward, several people approached me with questions. One of them asked if I had always been patient or if it was something I had learned. I thought about that. I told him I thought it was something I had chosen, which was not quite the same thing. On the drive home, I thought about Derek. I thought about the boy who had learned to charm his way out of trouble, who had believed that wanting something badly enough was a form of deserving it. I thought about the man who had built companies on borrowed confidence and discovered too late that confidence was not the same as competence. I thought about the moment in the conference room when he had looked at me and seen not his brother, but the embodiment of his own failure. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and a little sad, and mostly relieved that I had built a life that did not require me to be anyone other than who I was. I still run Velocity Solutions. The company is smaller than Derek wanted it to be, but it is profitable and stable. The employees know my name. The clients trust us. When problems arise, we solve them with patience and precision. I am 60 now. I could retire if I wanted to. I do not want to. I like the work. I like knowing that the things I build will outlast me, not because they are brilliant, but because they are sound. Derek and I do not speak. We see each other occasionally at family events, and when we do, we are polite in the way that strangers are polite. I do not think about him often. When I do, I think about the choices we each made and the lives those choices built. I think about the fact that discipline is not the absence of desire, but the presence of something stronger, a clarity about what matters, and a willingness to serve it even when no one is watching. I bought my brother's company not to punish him, but because I could. Because I had spent 30 years building the kind of life that allowed me to act when the moment came. Because I understood that success is not a moment of arrival, but a long accumulation of small, deliberate decisions that compound over time. Derek never understood that. He chased the arrival and missed the accumulation. He wanted the penthouse and ignored the foundation. I do not need him to understand it now. I do not need his acknowledgement or his apology or his respect. I have what I built, and it is enough. On my desk at work, I keep my mother's old notebook, the one with decades of careful entries. Sometimes, when the office is quiet, I open it and read a few pages. The handwriting is steady and clear. The numbers are small, but they add up. There is no drama in these pages, but there is something better. There is proof that a life lived with discipline and integrity leaves a mark, even if the mark is quiet. That is the inheritance I want to leave my daughters. Not wealth, though I will leave them that too, but the knowledge that you can choose discipline over flash, patience over noise, substance over spectacle, and build something that lasts. You can be mocked for it. You can be called boring. You can watch others soar past you on borrowed wings. And when those wings fail, as they always do, you will still be standing on the ground you built yourself, solid and unmoved. Derek learned this too late. I learned it early enough. That is the only difference that mattered. The pen I used to sign the purchase agreement sits in a drawer now, nothing special about it, just a pen. But I remember the weight of it in my hand, the scratch of ink on paper, the look on my brother's face when he realized what had happened. I remember thinking that justice is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet and precise, the natural consequence of choices made years before, compounding over time until they become undeniable. I signed my name, and the company became mine, and my brother walked out of the room knowing that the discipline he had mocked was the only reason he had anything left to walk away with. That was enough.